Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to week number 12 of the live interactive sessions for sustainable transportation systems. I am Seri Vinayagam, a PhD scholar from the Civil Engineering Department at IIT Madras. Okay, let's start with an overview of the concepts that were covered in week 12. Okay, so we had 5 lectures in week 12. So the first lecture continued from where we left off in the previous one. So in the previous week, we concluded with a tool called OpenLCA for conducting this life cycle assessment. Right, it was an open source tool, so that was introduced. So in this lecture, we were looking at a case study which used the OpenLCA tool for an application of assessing LHVs. Right, so LHV stands for longer and heavier vehicles. Right, so the assessment was basically to see how the LHVs contribute to the sustainability of freight transport. Okay, so this was conducted in 2018 in the German freight transport. Okay, so the objective was to compare this LHVs with conventional trucks. Okay, in comparison to the conventional trucks, so these are, as the name suggests, slightly longer vehicles, and also they have, they are heavier, and they allow, larger amount of goods to be transported compared to what is traditionally done. Okay, so when we are transporting large amount of good in one go, right? So then our fuel consumptions and emissions will also come down, right? So we have a potential of reducing or addressing the externalities in the road transport when we are shifting from the conventional trucks to the LHVs, right? So, but to formally assess it, to quantify the effects, so we are using the OpenLCA tool, right? So we looked at different scenarios, right? As the share of the LHVs increase, so what is its impact with respect to the health, with respect to environment, and also with respect to the resource consumption, right? So whether we have a positive or a negative, impact on these, criteria. So this was analyzed using this OpenLCA tool, right? So that was in the first lecture. In the second lecture, we looked at another tool, right? So this tool was called substance flow analysis, or STAN for short, right? So this is a tool that is used to conduct material flow analysis, right? So in short, MFA, right? So we already looked at what material flow analysis is in one of the earlier lectures, right? So basically, it is to analyze the flow of goods and substances, across a system, right? So again, a system is what we define, right? So with everything within a given boundary, process boundary, right? So with respect to that, we looked at different concepts like what is input, what is output, what is stock, right? So we looked at the concept equation for MFA. So all these things were revised again, right? And then this stand tool, how do we use this tool to conduct or to quantify these inputs, outputs, and stuff, and understand the flow of the materials within the system, right? So that was covered in the second lecture, right? So we looked at how to set up this and use the tool. So these were discussed, right? So again, this is the freeware, right? So which means it can be used free of cost. And then moving on into the third lecture. So here we were looking at sustainability indicators, right? So we are looking at different indicators for sustainability, how to quantify or quantitatively assess the sustainability of a given system, right? So what are the characteristics that an indicator for used for sustainability should have, and what are the different environmental sustainability indicators, right? Again, we have it for different contexts. So for environmental indicators specifically, so those were discussed, and then finally, with respect to transportation, what are the sustainable transportation indicators that are used in various frameworks across the world? So that was also discussed. And then in the fourth lecture, we were looking at one particular system or rating system called the Sustainable Transport Appraisal Ratings, or STAR for short. So this is specific for transportation related projects, right? So we looked at what are the features, what is the criteria that is used in getting this rating, and also the scales used in giving or providing points for the different criteria. So those were discussed, and finally an example or a case study of using this star rating system was also covered in lecture number 4. And in the last lecture, so we were looking at, how do we use these sustainability indicators, right? So we have looked at a variety of indicators, but how do we actually use them to measure sustainability, right? So that was the focus of this lecture. So here we were looking at how do we select a suitable indicator, right? So the selection process was discussed, and then again different index like the SDG, Transport Performance Index, and the EK or the Environmental Performance Index. So those were discussed in the final lecture. Okay, so with respect to that, these concepts, let's look at some questions. So the first question is, which of the following software is used for material flow analysis? So the options are Panache, Stan, Caline 4, and Listen. So we'll have polls. Okay, the poll is launched. So whenever you are ready, you can answer the poll. Okay, any answer? All right, so let's take a look at the answer now. So the right answer is option B. It is STAN, right? So STAN, the name stands for Substance Flow Analysis, right? So as I told earlier, it is a freeware, which means it can be used for free of cost, and it is developed for performing the material flow analysis, right? So this was developed in Austria, right? And so so this helps us to carry out the MFA, right? So again, not specifically for transportation for any projects, right? But in our context, we use it for transportation related systems, right? So, but it is generic, so it can be used for analyzing the material flow in any given system, right? So we can model it and then do the analysis. So the other one, so Panache is not for MFA. Caline 4, again, we have looked at earlier in the context of air quality, right? So it helps to model the dispersion simulation tool, right? So to do simulation analysis, right? So we use this system software, right? So generally for traffic flow modeling, right? So we use this software, right? So but here we are looking at material flow analysis, and for that STAN is the tool that we use. Okay, going to question number 2. The star rating system used in the transport project rating is developed by Dash. So the options are Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, World Bank, and Inter-American Development Bank. Okay, the poll is launched. Any answers? All right. So the right answer is option A. It is Asian Development Bank, right? So this star rating system, so it is used. It's specifically developed for assessing transportation projects, and the projects undertaken using the funds from the Asian Development Bank. So they are evaluated using this star rating system. Okay. So they developed it, and for assessing the transportation related projects funded through this star system is used. Okay, so question number 3 is the Sustainable Development Goals (SDG) India Index is developed by Dash. So options are Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Planning Commission, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, and Niti Aayog. Any answers? Okay, so the right answer is option D. It is Niti Aayog. Okay, so we have the SDG India Index. So this was developed by Niti Aayog, and it is for assessing how the progress with respect to the sustainable development goals. So, right, so we have 17 sustainable development goals, and how well we perform as a country with respect to these goals in achieving these goals. So we have this SDG India Index, right? So basically, what we'll do, we'll have data collected with respect to each of. So we'll have indicators, different indicators, right? So different indicators for that help us that are related to the different goals that we have, right? So we score each state and union territory according for each of these indicators, right? And then we'll have a particular score for each goal from each state and union territory. And then there is a way of combining this scores from these different indicators into average score for each goal, and then from each goal together into one final score, that is the index, right? So SDG India index, right? So this for this we need the data on the different related to the different goals, right? So initially we started, we did not cover all the 17 goals initially, but this has index has been revised multiple times, right? So currently it covers all the SDG goals, right? So with over 100 indicators, right? So that's how this SDG India index works, right? And it was developed by NITI. Okay, question number 4 is, as per the SDG Index 2020, India's policy trends are compatible with the 2 degrees Celsius Paris Agreement. We have to say whether the statement is true or false. Yes, we have one vote for A. It is true. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option A, that the given statement is true. Right, so here we are talking about the SDG index in 2020. Right, so how different countries' policies and the actions that they take, right, whether they are compatible with the Paris Agreement or not. Right, so if you recall from the previous lectures, so the Paris Agreement was to keep the global rise in temperatures to less than 2 degrees Celsius, right? So in this century, right, and preferably to less than 1.5 degrees, right? So but it is 2 degrees as per the agreement, right? So here we have a world map where different countries are colored differently based on how their or how compatible their policies, right, are with respect to this particular Paris Agreement, right? So if you look at it, so the gray color means that it is very critically insufficient, right? So the policies are not really adequate, that helps to keep the global warming to under 2 degrees Celsius, right? So and then we have a scale which progresses to the scale higher end is where it is a role model example, right? So if you look at it, so yellow means that that countries policies are compatible with this 2 degrees Celsius limit, right? So if you look at it, India comes under this category, right? So where the policies of our country are compatible with the Paris Agreement, right? So therefore, the given statement is correct in saying that India's policy trends are compatible with the Paris Agreement. Okay, therefore it is true. Okay, question number 5 is, in the Environmental Performance Index (EPI), environmental vitality has a weightage of dash. So the options are 40%, 60%, 70%, and 30%. Okay, the poll is launched. Okay, so we have one vote for B, 60%. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option B, that it is 60%, right? So this EPA is one of the indicators, right? So it stands for Environmental Performance Index, right? So here we have again different categories based on which this index is calculated, but we can group them into two broad categories. So one is with respect to environmental health, right? And the second category is with respect to the ecosystem vitality, right? So the environmental health in total has a 40% weightage, whereas the ecosystem vitality has a 60% weightage, right? So environmental health, when we are talking about indicators for that, so we are mainly concerned with the air quality, water quality, and with respect to heavy metals and how the wastes are being managed, right? So this is what we measure, to assess the health of the environment. Whereas the ecosystem vitality, right? So the or the more weightage category, 60%. So here, ecosystem vitality means how well we are preserving the environment, right? So how we are protecting, preserving, and improving the environment. So that's what we are concerned with respect to the ecosystem vitality, right? So whereas when we are looking at environmental health, it is with respect to how it is it is with respect to human health, right? So how compatible or how favorable is the environment with respect to human living conditions, right? So that's the environmental health. Whereas when we are talking about vitality, it is about how well we are preserving it, right? Not necessarily, from the point of view of human health, but in general, right? So keeping nature's resources as it is, right? So that's where the ecosystem vitality comes into it, and this is the category with the higher weightage. So here we look at biodiversity, right? So how many different number of species, right? So we have, in an area and so on, fisheries, climate change, all these come under the vitality aspect, right? So that's the one with the higher weightage in this particular index called EPA. Okay. Question number 6 is the region which is highly ranked according to environmental performance index is dash. So the options are Asia Pacific, Global West, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. Okay, we have one vote for B, Global West. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option B. It is the Global West. Okay, so Global West comprises of other countries like US, Canada, East, Western Europe, and so on. Right. So these countries together are called the Global West. Right. So here, if you look at the EPA scores, I mean, an EPA we have these two broad categories, right? So ecosystem vitality and the environmental health, as we looked at it earlier. So where the vitality has a higher weightage. So here we are looking at a scatter plot of different countries scores with respect to these two categories, right? So if we have a point in the top right corner, that will be the ideal point, right? So it has the highest score on both aspects, right? So whereas on the lower left, so that will be the least or the worst value for the index, right? So where it is not good on both, right? So if you look at the different countries API values with respect to these two categories. So what we are looking at it. So on the top right, so we have this cluster of countries, right, scores. So this are coming from the countries from the global west, right? So where we are seeing high score on the environmental health as well as the ecosystem vitality, right? So they are doing well on both of these aspects, right? So after them comes the Eastern Europe, countries from Eastern Europe, and finally we have the South Asian countries, right? So where the scores are lower with respect to both aspects, right? So therefore, because these global west has high score on both vitality as well as in the environmental health, so the EPI value will always will also be higher for the global west, right? So the question was about which is highly ranked. So highly ranked means the EPI value is higher, right? So therefore, global west will have the higher ranking according to EPI. The question number 7 is which of the following SDGs has been omitted in the SDG India Index? So the options are SDG 9, SDG 2, SDG 17, and SDG 15. Okay, we have one more for C, SDG 17. Any other answers? All right, so the right answer is option C, it is SDG 17. Okay, so here the question is which of the following SDGs has been omitted in the SDG India Index, right? So as we discussed, the SDG India Index comes up with a score with respect to the progress made with respect to the different SDG goals, right? So we have 17 of them as you are aware, right? So we need the data with respect to multiple indicators, right? So for each goal we'll have multiple indicators, right? And so therefore, unless we have the data for all these indicators for a particular goal, so we will not be able to come up with the score, right? So if you look at the SDG India Index, so the SDG 17 has been omitted because what is this goal? So SDG 17 is about the mechanisms and partnerships in achieving the sustainable development goals, right? But because of the unavailability of the data with respect to this goal, at the state or the union territory level, so this has been omitted from the SDG India Index, right? So it is because of the unavailability of the data at the state level, right? So SDG 17 is the one that is not in the SDG India Index, right? So we saw this was developed by Niti Aayog. So C is the right answer. Question number 8 is, which of the following is the correct order for the methodology of construction of the SDG India Index? So the four options are given. So we have different parts. So one is with respect to raw data, target setting, normalization, goal score, and composite score. And they have been put in different orders in each of the option, but only one of them is the right way of conducting or coming up with this SDG India Index, right? So we have to choose the correct order. Okay, we have one vote for B, raw data, then normalization, target setting, goal score, and composite score. Okay, any other answers? All right, so the right option is actually option A. It is first raw data, then target setting, third is normalization, goal score, finally it is the composite score, right? So here is the flow chart of the methodology for constructing the SDG India Index. So we start with the raw data, right? So as I said, we have multiple indicators, right? So for each or whichever is the state for which we are calculating it, so we obtain this raw data, right? So according to the different indicators, and if some data is missing, we also take note of that, right? So that is the first step to collect the raw data. Second is to go for target setting, right? So when we are constructing this index, so we need to to evaluate it, we need to have some target, right? So then only we can say we are close to it, or we need to do a lot to achieve it, right? So we need to have a target, and this target is the national target for 2000 for the year 2030, right? So we have it for each of the indicators, right? So once we have the target, we go for the normalization, right? So what is the purpose of this? The normalization is to basically convert this. So the raw data will be in different scales, right? So for each indicator, the score will be in a different scale, but we have to bring it all of them into a single scale, right? A value between 0 and 100, right? So that's what we do in the normalization. So the raw data will be converted to a score between 0 and 100, right? So 100 will be the best and 0 will be the worst, right? So that is the intuitive scale that we'll be working with. So that process of conversion is the normalization. So once we have the normalized score for each indicator, then we go for a goal score, right? So again, as we saw, we have a score for all the different SDG goals, right? So for each indicator, we have now a score between 0 and 100. So this is aggregated for each goal. So we'll now have one score for one goal, right? So this is now taken as the arithmetic mean, right? So basically the average of the normalized scores for all the indicators that correspond to that particular goal, right? So then we'll have one score for each goal. And finally, we go for the composite score, right? So this is our final, SDG India index value, right? So this is calculated by taking the average across all the goal scores, right? So we had one score for each goal. We take the average of all the scores for each goal, right? So that will be the final score, composite score, which is the index, right? So this is the correct order of constructing our index, right? So therefore, raw data followed by target setting, normalization, goal score, and composite score. So that is given in option A, right? So therefore, A is the right answer. Okay, question number 9 is the star rating system has 4 criteria and 15 sub-criteria for evaluation. We have to say whether the statement is true or false. Okay, so we have one vote for A. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option B, that the given statement is false. Why? Because when we are looking at the star system, right? So here the statement is about the number of criteria and sub-criteria that are there in the system, right? So it says there are 4 criteria and 15 sub-criteria. So the first part is correct, that it has 4 criteria, right? So we have an economic criteria, a poverty and social criteria, environmental, and risk to sustainability, right? So these are the 4 criteria. So that is correct. But each of these criteria has a number of sub-criteria, right? So economic has 5 sub-criteria, poverty as well as environment. So all these three have 5 sub-criteria each. And but finally the risk has only 3 sub-criteria. So in total, if we sum them up, there will be 18 sub-criteria in total in the star system, right? So therefore, it is partly correct that it has 4 criteria, but the number of sub-criteria is wrong. So it should be 18, right? So therefore, in total, this given statement is incorrect. B is the right answer. Okay, question number 10 is STAR rating system stands for dash. So the options are Sustainable Transit Assessment Rating, Systematic Transit Assessment Rating, Sustainable Transportation Appraisal Rating, Sustainable Transportation Assessment Rating. Any answer? Yes, we have one more for A, Sustainable Transit Assessment Rating. Any other answers? All right. So the right option is option C, the Sustainable Transportation Appraisal Rating. Right. So So we saw what this STAR system is, right? So it is developed by the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, right? So, and we also saw it is specifically developed for evaluating transportation related projects, right? It's not just for transit, right? So transit means we are looking at public transit modes, right? So it's not just for that, but any anything to do with transportation, any project has that has related to transportation. So this is applicable for that, not necessarily for transit systems, right? So it is to evaluate the sustainability aspect of these transportation related projects, right? So therefore it is, and expansion of STAR is Sustainable Transportation Appraisal Rating. Right? So C is the right answer. Okay, question number 11 is which one of the following options is not an application of the OpenLCA tool? So the options are carbon footprint, water footprint, life cycle costing, and project viability. We have one vote for D, project viability. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option B. It is project viability, which is not an application for the OpenLCA tool, right? So we have looked at the OpenLCA tool in detail, right? So what it is, right, and how it is to be used. So it is basically for conducting the life cycle analysis, right? So in life cycle analysis, we are concerned with a product or a process, right? And throughout its life cycle, right? So from the starting points again, it is defined by the use case, right? From where you consider the origin of this product, right? So it could be from the manufacturing stage or it could be even earlier, right? So from the mining itself for the raw materials, right? So from there till again to the end of the product life. So again depends on the analysis boundary. So it could be till the end of the manufacturing, till the end of delivery to the end user, or till the after the product has been used and disposed, right? So over this defined boundary, within this defined boundary, what happens with respect to the emissions or the resource consumption and so on. To analyze all this is what we use the life cycle analysis, right? And this open LCA allows us to conduct this LCA, right? So it can be used for carbon footprint. So footprint is basically tells you how much of the resource that we are consuming, right? So in conducting that process or in making that product, right? So a larger footprint means that we are consuming more of that um, particular resource, right? So we are leaving a larger footprint on the ecosystem. So carbon footprint, so basically how much carbon is being released into the atmosphere, right? Or we can also analyze how much, if we are looking at a project where we are planting trees, we are analyzing how much carbon absorption that we have got. So all those things can be done. So similarly with water footprint, right? So how much water is being used in the whole life of this particular product, or life cycle costing, right? So with respect to cost also you could do it over the life of the project. And the final one, project viability. So that is not really related to LCA, right? So project viability is whether the project is feasible, right? So it whether the project is feasible to do, right? So it's a decision that we make at a single point in time, right? So at the planning stage, whether we have to go ahead with this project or not. Right? So again, it could be based on different criteria. You could look at financial viability, could look at technical viability, right? So whether it is possible to undertake this or not, whether the technology is available or not, and so on. So again, we could also look at environmental aspects in it, right? But this is not something that we do across different points in time of the project, right? So it is done at the start of the project. It's not really suitable to use OpenLCA for it, right? So OpenLCA is for considering the whole life cycle of the project, right? So whereas the project viability is not really something that is done throughout it. It is before the project is started, right? So therefore, it is not really an application for the OpenLCA tool, right? So therefore, the right option is D. Question number 12 is the first edition of the SDG India Index, that is Index 1.0, was launched in the year dash. The options are 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Okay, we have one more for B, 2018. Any other answers? Okay, so the right option is option B, which is 2018. So, so this SDG India Index, again, we have talked about it multiple times. It's a fairly recent one, right? So, like 5 years ago, it was launched. Okay, so that it is called Index 1, the first edition of it. So we have multiple revisions to it as well, right? So every year, so we had some revisions, right? But the first edition was in the year 2018, right? So it is, as we saw, to evaluate, the how this SDG goals are fulfilled, right? So we have to come up with a single score, right? So again, as we saw, we looked at the process, right? So this the first one didn't cover all the goals, right? So it didn't have that many indicators as well. But right now, the latest versions covers all the goals and also has over 100 plus indicators, based on which the scores are calculated, right? So but the first edition was in 2018. So the right answer is B. Okay, question number 13 is an ecological footprint is a measure of how much of the Earth's resources we are using. So we have to say whether the given statement is true or false. Okay, there is one more for true. Any other answers? All right. So the right answer is option A, that the given statement is true. Okay, so this is basically what the ecological footprint means, right? So we looked at that earlier, right? So with respect to carbon footprint, water footprint. So in general, it is an ecological footprint. So that is for a particular society or a community. uh, right? So how much of the land or the earth's resource is required for that particular for that community to carry out their processes, their conduct life with the current lifestyle, right? So if it is large, right? So if they require for that lifestyle to sustain, if you need a large area, right? So basically the resources from a large area, which we'll say that that has a larger ecological footprint, right? Which is not a really sustainable thing, right? So when the ecological footprint is large, it's not sustainable, right? So uh, because you're consuming more and more, right? So for a particular way of life, right? So this ecological footprint is basically an indicator for the sustainability of a system, right? So smaller footprint is better, more sustainable than a larger ecological footprint, right? So it's basically a measure of how much of the resource we are using. So therefore the given statement is correct. Okay, question number 14 is in STAN for material flow analysis, the box made of dash lines represent dash. The options are process, flow, system boundary, and text box. Okay, we have one more for C, system boundary. Any other answer? Okay, so the right answer is option C. It is for system boundary. Yes, so STAN, the tool, for substance flow analysis, right? So we also looked at how to use this tool, right? So here is the example from where we looked at the interface, right? So there are different, shapes, and symbols that are available to represent, the different components required for, modeling the flow of a system, right? So here, if you're looking at it, so there are different shapes that are available to us, right? So some of these are given here. So we have, this dashed line, a box made of this dashed line, right? A solid line box with a P inside, and this particular yellow box and so on, right? So here, this dashed line is what we are looking at. So this is used to represent a system boundary, right? So system boundary will define the system for us, right? So everything that comes into the system will be the input, everything that leaves this boundary would be the output, and whatever is staying in will be the stock within the system, right? So the boundary defines the edges of the system, and in stand that is represented using this, the box with a dashed line, right? So the question was about the symbol that Question number 15 is the EPI Environmental Performance Index was developed by Dash. The options are University of Nottingham, Yale University, Technical University Vienna, and University of Chicago. Here there is one vote for B. Yale. Any other answers? All right. So the right answer is option B. It is Yale University. Right. So Technical University Vienna. So that is in Austria. So that's associated with STAN. Right. So STAN tool was developed by the Technical University in Vienna, whereas the EPI is from Yale University. Right. So these are the two institutes that you need to remember. Right. So Yale is for EPI and Vienna is for the stand too. Okay, so here we are talking about EPI, so it was developed by Yale University. Okay, question number 16 is international institutions which assist with grants or loans to developing countries are called multilateral development banks. So we have to say whether this given definition is correct or not. Okay, there is one vote for true. Any other answer? Okay, so the right answer is option A, that the given statement is true, right? So that is the right definition for the multilateral development banks. Right? So basically, these are institutions, right, so that are not specific to a single country, right? So these, provide, grants or loans to countries, to the developing countries, to help or assist with their, projects that are of, larger scale, right? So to help with them financially, uh, uh, you know, uh, these multilateral development banks, provide these loans, right? So the Asian Development Bank, which came up with the star rating system that we have looked at, so it's one of the multilateral development banks, right? So basically, for all the Asian countries, so it generally provides the loans, to build this massive projects, right? So other MDBs that you may be aware of are the World Bank, you know, the African Development Bank, the European Bank, and so on, right? So these are multilateral development banks, right? So they provide loans to the different developing countries, to assist with their, multi-billion dollar projects, right? So therefore, the given statement is correct about the multilateral development banks. Okay, question number 17 is, in stand for material flow analysis, the broad and dark lines represent dash. So the options are higher flow, input flows, output flows, and system boundary. There is one vote for A, higher flow. Any other answers? All right. So the right answer is option A, that it represents higher flow, right? So we already looked at the symbol for system boundary instant, right? So that was the box made up of dashed lines. So here we are talking about, not dashed lines, solid lines, but these are broad and dark. So this represents what? So instead, this represents a higher amount of flow, right? So as we see in this particular example, so we have three such arrows, right? So one for the input, one for the output, and one for the stock. So if you look at it, so depending on the flow, right? So the thickness of this lines vary, right? So here the input is higher, the output and the stock are relatively smaller than the input, right? Because these two should sum up to the input, right? So each of them individually will be lesser than the input, right? So input is much broader than the output or the stock, and relatively output is also higher than the stock, right? So these, but the directions will tell you whether it is an input or output, right? So the thickness alone will not just tell you whether it is a input flow or output flow. But the broader it is, it represents the higher flow, right? So that we can be sure of. Therefore, the right answer is that the broad and dark lines represent the higher flow in stand, right? So therefore, A is the right answer. Okay, question number 18 is OECD stands for dash. The options are Organization for Economic Coordination and Development, Organization for Ecological Cooperation and Development, Organization for Ecological Coordination and Development, and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Yes, there is one vote for B. Any other answers? All right. So the right answer is option B. It is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Right? So you would have heard about this term of OECD group of countries, right? So it's basically a forum, right? So where it's basically again a group of different countries, right? So there are about 35 plus countries, right? So this is where these countries that come together and come up with policies and strategies, for their economic development, right? So that is the OECD, right? So again, we have also looked at one of the indicators for sustainability that's developed by the OECD, right? So there are different indicators developed by different institutions and organizations. So this OECD also has their own indicator of sustainable development, right? So the right answer is D. Okay, question number 19 is the sustainable indicators should not be dash. So the options are easily measurable, acceptable to all, influenced by any interest groups, and easily understandable. Any answers? Okay, so yeah, one more for A. Any other answers? Okay, so the right answer is option C, that it should not be influenced by any interest groups. Okay, so before we looked at all those different examples of sustainability indicators, so we also had talked about what are the characteristics that the sustainability indicator should satisfy, right? So the different characteristics include, it should address the carrying capacity, right? Um, so like when some particular resource is being used, at a given rate, right? Then it should uh, so well, if it is being depleted faster, right? So in that case, the indicator should take care of that, right? So it's not just whether the resource is being used or not, and whether it is used and not just the quantity of the consumption, but also the rate of the consumption, right? So for example, if you're talking about fossil fuels, right? So we say that these are non-renewable resources, right? We are saying it non-renewable in our particular context, right? So it's not regeneratable in a few years, right? So it takes millions of years for these coal and other fossil fuels to get developed, right? So if you are talking about scales of that order, so in that case we can say they are renewable, right? But it's not really practical to call them renewable, right? So because it takes millions of years to come up with, right? So therefore, in that sense, it is non-renewable, right? So here, therefore, the rate of consumption of these resources also play an important role in relation to how much are their regeneration rate, right? So the indicator should be able to address that, and it should be relevant to the community, right? So basically, it should not be it should be measuring something that is relevant, right? So or practical, right? So it should not be out of the context, right? Here we are talking about sustainability, so measuring air quality, water quality, those things make sense, right? So it should be relevant in that context. It should be understandable, right? So people must be able to understand what the indicator is measuring or what it is telling, right? So that so they understand or take it seriously, and therefore also work towards improving the sustainability. And it should be usable by the community, right? So basically, if it is not really relevant or not really understandable, so it was not really helpful. So in that way, it will not help us achieve sustainability, right? So therefore, it should be usable by the community, and it show linkages. So basically, how different effects or different criteria are linked to different the different goals and different the effects or emissions and so on, right? So those linkage, it should be clear in the indicator how it is affected by the different processes, and it should also look at a long term view, right? So again, sustainability, it cannot be achieved in a day, so it should take into account the scales of how things changes, right? And that should also be incorporated into the indicators, right? So these are some of the characteristics that an indicator should have so that it can qualify as a sustainability indicator, right? So here in the question, so we are talking about what it should not be, right? So which means it should not So we also already looked at that it should be easily measurable, right? So if you cannot measure it, so you cannot, it won't be useful, right? So the indicator should be measurable and it should be acceptable by all, right? So it should be for everyone and it should be understandable by everyone, right? So it should be acceptable to everyone and also understandable. Again, we saw that it is required, it's one of the characteristics, but C is not really a characteristic. If it is influenced by a particular interest group, then the results may sway towards one particular group, right? Right, but that should not be the case. It should be neutral. It should be taking into account all these characteristics without being favoring one particular group or the other. Right? It should not. That is not a characteristic for a sustainability indicator. Right? So therefore, C is the right answer. That it is not to be the case for a sustainability indicator. Right? Therefore, C is the right answer. Okay, question number 20. The stand tool for material flow analysis was published by Dash. The options are University of Nottingham, Yale University, Technical University Vienna, and University of Chicago. We have one vote for C. Any other answers? All right. So the right option C, it is Technical University Vienna, right? So I already gave away this answer in one of the previous questions, right? So I told these are the two institutes that you should remember from this week, right? So the Air University was for EPI, right? So they developed the EPI Environmental Performance Index, and the Technical University Vienna, right, in Austria. So they developed the stand tool that is used for doing the MFA, right? So here we are looking at the stand tool, so that is developed by option C. Okay, so C is the right answer. Question 21 is which of the following is not one of the 17 sustainable development goals? Options are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and travel and tourism. So we have one more for B. Any other answers? All right. So the right option is actually option D, it is travel and tourism, right? So we have 17 SDGs, right? So no poverty is the first goal, zero hunger, second one, good health and well-being is the third goal, right? So all these three are actually the sustainable development goals, right? So whereas travel and tourism, right, it's not really a sustainable development goal, right? So it's not required to have to focus on travel and tourism, right? So when we are talking about the in the context of sustainable development, but zero poverty, zero hunger, and providing good health and well-being for everyone. So these are goals, for sustainable development, right? So therefore, here we are talking about which is not a SDG, right? So therefore, travel and tourism is not one of them. Okay, so D is the right answer. Okay, question number 22 is which environmental indicator of sustainability measures the amount of land required to support a particular lifestyle? The options are carbon footprint, water footprint, ecological footprint, and all of the above. There is one more for D, all of the above. Any other answer? All right. So the right answer is option C. It is ecological footprint. Right. So I already told what the ecological footprint is. So that is basically when if you're looking at a particular lifestyle, so to support that, right? So you require a different resources, right? So to conduct that particular lifestyle. So this again comes from different parts, right? So the land that is required, to get all these resources so that this particular lifestyle can be conducted. So that's what we call as the ecological footprint, right? So if you require more land, you are leaving a larger ecological footprint, which is not sustainable, right? So that's what we looked at. So this particular question is asking exactly that. So which is the indicator that measures this, the land requirement for a particular lifestyle. Right? So that is ecological footprint, whereas water and carbon footprint, they are, specific for a particular, resource. Right? So here we are not talking about anything in particular. It is general for any resource. Right? So in that case, ecological footprint is the more precise answer. Right? So therefore, C is the right option. Okay, any questions? With this, we are coming to the end of week 12. Okay, so if you have any questions or clarifications, you can ask me. Okay, so if there are no further questions, we can wrap up today's session. Okay, and also this is the last week, right? So this is week 12. So with this, we are completing all the live sessions. Okay, I hope that these sessions help you, in solving the assignments, answering them, and also hope that this will help you with your exams as well. Okay, so all the best for your exams. Okay, so I hope you all do well. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for attending these sessions. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the questions may follow the same format. So mostly it will have this multiple choice kind of things, but there can be some numericals as well. So, but it's better to check, in the website with respect to this particular course code. Yeah, so there may not be a huge change. Yeah, yeah. So if there are no further questions, so we can feel free to log out. Again, all the best for you.